I drove 12 hours straight, through the night, through the mountains, through my own doubts, just to watch my son get promoted. No invite, no fanfare, just a father's pride pushing him forward. But when I got there, security told me I wasn't welcome. My own son said I'd be an embarrassment to his image. So yeah, I made a call. 10 minutes later, I was seated at the high table, across from the man who wanted to pretend I didn't exist. And that's where this story begins. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me thank you for your continuous support. If you love stories like this one, support us by subscribing to this channel and comment where you're watching us from. It will be great to hear from you. Now let's jump into the details of what happened. 12 hours behind the wheel will tell you things about yourself you didn't ask to know. Somewhere between Barstow and Beaver, I realized I hadn't said my son's name out loud in over 6 weeks. Marcus. Just Marcus. Not my boy. Not my kid. Just Marcus. That was the first time it hit me. Maybe I was driving all this way for a man who had already left me behind. I left Fresno just after midnight, with a half tank of gas and a pack of gas station coffee cakes. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Not my brother, not my bowling league buddies, not even the lady I sometimes sit next to at church who always smells like peppermint and asks too many questions. I wanted it to be a surprise, not for Marcus, necessarily, but for me. Like if I showed up without warning, it would feel more real, more earned. The drive was quiet, but not peaceful. My old F-150 rattled more than it used to. I kept the radio off most of the way, letting the hum of the tires give me something to think through. When I passed through Las Vegas around sunrise, I remember staring at the neon still blinking faintly against the brightening sky and wondering how many times Marcus had flown over this whole stretch of earth without even thinking about me below. He traveled a lot now. For work, for training, for status. He called it clearance-level work. I called it a wall. Marcus used to tell me everything. Back when he was a skinny teenager with big ears and louder dreams, he used to sit on the back porch with me and talk about things like he thought I could fix the world for him. I still remember the day he got his acceptance letter to the Federal Academy. He cried, said, "We made it, Dad." Like it was our win. That was 4 years ago. In the months that followed, he got quieter. Polite, but distant. He started correcting how I talked. Told me to say going to instead of gonna. He didn't like when I wore my mechanic shirts in public, even though they were clean. I stopped getting invited to things. Little things, at first, then bigger ones. By the time this promotion ceremony rolled around, I had to find out from a Facebook post shared by his ex-girlfriend's cousin. I laughed when I saw it. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. But I still packed my bag, filled the truck, and left before I could change my mind. The mountains came into view just past Cedar City. The air started to smell cleaner, like pine and road salt. I rolled the window down and let the cold bite at my face. I told myself over and over again, it doesn't matter what seat I get. Doesn't matter who shakes my hand. I just want to see my son walk across that stage. And I meant it. I really did. I wasn't looking for praise or thanks or even recognition. Just a glance. A nod. Some sign that all those years of patching drywall and skipping meals and working Saturdays weren't invisible. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the conference center, my knuckles were sore from gripping the wheel too hard. I checked myself in the rearview mirror. The tie I wore hadn't been used since my cousin's funeral. It was wrinkled, but I figured the sentiment would smooth it out. I patted down my hair, took a breath, and stepped out. The place was crawling with brass and suits. High-end tights, metals, crisp heels clicking across the pavement. I felt out of place instantly, but I kept my chin up, held the invitation I printed from the website, and walked up to the entrance. A man in a black polo with a clipboard stopped me. Name: Raymond Freeman. I'm here for my son, Marcus Freeman. He scanned the list. Then again, his expression changed. I'm sorry, sir. You're not on the list. I blinked. Must be a mistake. He's being promoted today. I'm his father. The man looked uncomfortable. He stepped aside to make a quick call on his earpiece. I waited. People walked past me, glancing but not stopping. After a moment, another man in a suit came out, younger, looking like he hadn't been doing the job long. Mr. Freeman, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Your son gave specific instructions that you not be admitted. That sentence hit harder than the steering wheel would have if I'd veered off the road in Nevada. I swallowed. What? He said. He said it would be better for the image of the event if you weren't seen. The air drained out of my chest. So, I drove 12 hours by myself to support my son, and now you're saying I'm an embarrassment to him. The man didn't answer, just looked away. I didn't yell, didn't make a scene. I turned around, walked back to my truck, and sat in the driver's seat with the door open, staring at the venue. That was when I made the call. The phone rang twice before Greg picked up. Ray? Everything all right? I kept my voice low. You still know anyone over at Homeland? He paused. You in trouble? No, I said, but I might be about to embarrass the hell out of someone. Greg didn't ask for details. We had a code between us that went back to a dusty barracks in Kandahar. He said he'd call me back in 10. I sat there in my truck, hands trembling, not from nerves, but from something heavier. Rage? Hurt? I couldn't tell. I looked back toward the entrance where people were still filing in, shaking hands, fixing jackets, posing for pictures. I kept thinking about how Marcus used to grip my hand at the county fair so tight you'd think the rides would steal him away. I remembered how, when he was 8, he wrote me a Father's Day card that said, "You're not like the other dads. You're better." 10 minutes later, a third man came out. This one had presence. Older, buzz cut, hard stare. He looked around the lot, spotted me, and walked straight to my truck. Mr. Freeman? I stood. Yeah. He offered his hand. Colonel Danvers. Please, come with me. I didn't ask questions. I followed him past the same clipboard guy, who suddenly looked like he wanted to melt into the pavement. We moved through a side entrance, down a carpeted hallway lined with framed portraits and military crests. My boots felt too loud. Danvers opened a door into a wide ballroom. Round tables, navy tablecloths, white china, and dead center, a long elevated table set for the top brass. He pointed. That seat's yours. I stared at it. A name card with my name. Not father of Marcus Freeman. Just Raymond Freeman. People were watching. Not staring, just noticing. Whispers started. I could feel the ripple move through the room. But I kept walking. Marcus was already seated 3 places down. He looked up. His eyes locked on mine. And I saw it. Not surprise. Not shock. Just fury. I nodded. Sat down. Adjusted my tie. The woman next to me smiled politely. Proud day. I gave her the smallest nod I could. Supposed to be. Across the room, Marcus leaned in and whispered to the man beside him. That man looked over at me, then quickly away. I didn't touch the water glass in front of me. My hands were too tight, too ready. The program began. Someone tapped a mic. Names were read, honors bestowed. I watched my son walk across the stage to receive his promotion, his new insignia gleaming under the lights. He didn't look at me once. But I was there, and everyone knew it. And that seat at the high table? It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like reclamation. We were halfway through the ceremony when I felt it, the quiet heat of his stare. Marcus hadn't said a word to me, but I could feel him glancing, fuming, waiting for a moment to pull me aside. I knew it was coming. The colonel next to me leaned in and said, "Your son's done good." You raised a sharp one. I nodded and gave a half smile. Appreciate that. He didn't know. None of them did. When the final applause died down and the last hands were shaken, Marcus made his move. He waited until most of the top brass had stepped away for photos, and then came at me fast, jaw tight. He didn't even try to pretend. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed. I stood slowly, careful not to make a scene, watching my son get promoted, just like a father should. I told them not to let you in. And yet, here I am, I said calmly. Marcus looked around, checking if anyone was watching. You embarrassed me. You have no idea how this looks. I stepped closer. No, son. What you did, that's the embarrassment. He flinched like I slapped him. We stood there for a long second. Then he muttered, "You don't get it. You never fit in. You still don't. These people, they expect a certain image. An image that doesn't include the man who raised you." I asked. He swallowed. I just didn't want them asking questions. I felt something in my chest crack open. Questions like what? He didn't answer. Couldn't. So I answered for him. Like why your father wears boots instead of loafers? Why he smells like grease and not cologne? Why his hands are calloused instead of soft? I gave you everything, Marcus. Everything. And this is how you repay me. He shook his head, tried to walk away. I grabbed his arm, not rough, just firm enough to stop him. I came 12 hours without knowing if I'd even get a seat, because despite everything, I still wanted to be proud of you. But let me tell you something, son. The shame isn't on me. People were starting to watch now. A camera phone rose in the distance. I let go of him. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, and said quietly, "You should go, before this gets worse." I didn't flinch. It already got worse. The moment you forgot where you came from. I walked away first this time. Back to my seat. Back to the colonel. He gave me a subtle nod. Respect, not pity. And I knew then, I wasn't alone in that room. But Marcus was. The reception that followed should have been a time for toasts and laughter, but it felt like walking into a courtroom with no verdict yet delivered. People milled about with flutes of champagne and practiced smiles, but every time I moved, conversations shifted, like leaves rustling before a storm. I didn't mind. Let them talk. Let them wonder who I was and why Marcus looked like he'd swallowed a fistful of glass. I stood near a high-top table, nursing a soda, when a woman in uniform came over. Maybe late 30s, sharp eyes, the kind of posture that doesn't come from yoga. "You Marcus Freeman's father?" she asked. I straightened. "That depends." She smirked. "I'm Major Elsie Zhang. I served with Marcus last year overseas. He talked about you. A lot." I braced myself. "Good things." She nodded. "Yeah, at least back then. He used to brag about how you could rebuild an engine with one hand and a broken socket wrench. Said you were the reason he knew how to think on his feet." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and took another sip. She leaned in a little. "I don't know what happened between you two, but I'll say this, you walking in here today? That took guts. Most people in his shoes wouldn't know how to handle real." I wanted to thank her, but my throat was tight. I just nodded again. From across the room, Marcus was watching. Our eyes met for half a second, and he looked away. Fast. Like I was some kind of radiation he couldn't afford to absorb. Later, after the crowd thinned and most of the small talk ran dry, he finally approached again. This time, his walk was slower. He looked tired, like the performance had drained him. He stopped a few feet away. "Why'd you do it, Dad?" I shook my head slowly. "Why'd I come?" "Because I'm your father. That hasn't changed, even if everything else has." He looked around. "You didn't have to call in favors." "I didn't do it to embarrass you," I said. "But I wasn't going to let you erase me. Not after everything." His voice was low, tense. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. These people, status means everything." I stepped in. "Pressure? Marcus, I raised you under pressure. I worked 3 jobs so you could wear cleats instead of holes. I didn't know the meaning of rest until you left the house. And now I'm your liability." He didn't answer, so I kept going. "You can polish your words, press your shirts, play the part. But you're standing on a foundation built with my bare hands. Don't forget that." He turned, almost left again, then stopped. "They said you spoke to Colonel Danvers." He was impressed. I let out a quiet laugh. I wasn't trying to impress him. I was trying to remind you that I exist. For the first time, Marcus looked like he didn't know what to say. That silence said more than anything he could have muttered. I didn't expect an apology. Still don't. But as he turned and walked away again, slower this time, thoughtful, I knew he'd remember this day. Maybe not today. Maybe not next week. But one day, he'll remember the seed I earned. And the father he left behind. The next morning, I left before sunrise. The hotel coffee was thin and bitter, and I drank it anyway. My truck was still parked under a flickering light, the hood dusted with early frost. I tossed my bag in the passenger seat, slid in behind the wheel, and sat there for a minute, key in hand, not quite ready to start the engine. I kept replaying it all. The ballroom, the high table, the way Marcus looked at me like I was the ghost of a past he was trying to forget. And then the way he walked off, defeated? Defensive? I couldn't tell. I started the truck. The drive back wasn't like the one coming in. It wasn't laced with hope. It was clean. Final. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. Somewhere between Provo and Vegas, I turned off the GPS and let the road decide for a while. There's a peace that comes when you stop expecting people to become who you hoped they'd be. Around noon, I pulled into a diner outside Mesquite. place was empty except for a waitress with a smoker's voice and a smile too bright for the hour. I ordered eggs and toast. She called me Han. It was the warmest moment I'd had all weekend. While I waited, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Is this Mr. Freeman? Yes. This is Colonel Danvers. I sat up. Yes, sir. I wanted to thank you again for attending yesterday. I had a few enlightening conversations afterward. I stayed quiet. I won't get into it all, but I will say this. Men like you don't get enough credit. And too many young men forget whose shoulders they're standing on. That hit me harder than I expected. Appreciate that, I said. Truly. He cleared his throat. We'll be keeping an eye on Marcus. Bright future. But he's got some learning to do. I couldn't help it. I chuckled. He always has. We exchanged a few more words, then hung up. My food arrived just after. I sat there a long time, eating slow, watching a family at the far booth. A dad helping his daughter with a straw wrapper. A little boy squirming in his seat. And I thought, God, I gave everything. I missed birthdays. I worked overtime. I let that boy believe we were rich when I had $10 in my wallet and overdue rent. And now, because I didn't fit into his new world, I was cast out like a used rag. But then I remembered the Colonel's words. Men like you don't get enough credit. When I got back on the road, I called Greg. You all right? He asked. I told him the truth. I'm done chasing. He knows who I am. If he forgets, that's on him. Greg was quiet a second. Then he said, Proud of you, Ray. I didn't say anything back. But that stuck with me the rest of the ride home. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt it too. Proud. Not of Marcus. Of me. The day after I got home, I unpacked slowly, like my body didn't want to admit I was staying. I dropped my duffel by the couch and stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the framed photo on the shelf. Marcus at 13, all knees and elbows, grinning wide with one arm slung around my neck. That version of him was long gone. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No calls. No messages. No apology waiting in my voicemail. I checked anyway. Nothing. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee that went cold too fast. Neighbors passed and waved. I nodded, hollow. I felt like a man who had buried something he didn't know how to grieve. The next week brought more of the same. Silence. I didn't reach out. I didn't check his social media. But then one afternoon, Greg called again. You seen the forums? He asked. No. What? There's a clip. Someone recorded your argument. It's making the rounds. My stomach dropped. Oh. You didn't say anything wrong, he added quickly. People are siding with you. Even some of Marcus's own colleagues. There's a lot of talk about humility, about legacy. I didn't know whether to be relieved or sick. I didn't want to go viral, I muttered. Yeah, well, sometimes truth hits a nerve, Greg said. 2 days later, a letter showed up. Handwritten. No return address. Dad, I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought I could keep you and this life separate. Maybe I was ashamed of how hard you worked because I didn't want anyone to know how far we'd come. But I see now, that's the story worth telling. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Marcus, I read it once. Then again. Then I folded it and slid it between 2 old bills in my desk drawer. Not to forget it, but to remember it happened. That night, I drove to the edge of town. There's a stretch of road there, open and quiet. I parked the truck, turned off the engine, and just listened. Crickets. A breeze through the brush. My own breathing. I thought about what it meant to be a father. To give everything and expect nothing. To be invisible and present at the same time. And I realized something. You can raise a man right and still have him choose wrong. That's not on you. I didn't write back. But I didn't throw the letter away either. He knows where I am. If he ever wants to come back, he can walk the road like I did. One step at a time. Until then, I'll be here. Fixing things with my hands. Living with my name. And not carrying shame that doesn't belong to me. If this story hit you in the gut, you're not alone. Family doesn't always mean closeness. And respect should never be optional. Have you ever been pushed aside by someone you loved? Drop your story in the comments. Let's talk about what it means to stand your ground when the people who should have stood by you turn away.